afternoon. I'll start. I would like to welcome you here at another session of the Inspiration Forum. Today we will talk about freedom in Hungary, about how Orbán's propaganda systematically destroys rights of the LGBTQI+ community. The title of this discussion is Fragile, Take Care of. And recently we have seen that this community and the idea that all fights have been fought is very fragile. We have seen that in Slovakia recently. And I would like to dedicate this debate to Juraj and Matúš, who died just and only because of their identity. Now let's get to our guest. I'm very delighted to welcome here the Hungarian activist of the LGBTQI community, Dorottya Rédai. Welcome. I also would like to mention that this topic is about people. So I would like to get you involved in the debate as well. I will have 3 slots during our debate, and you will have an opportunity to ask questions during these 3 opportunities. I would also like to say that Dorottya is a member of Labris, the Lesbian Association, which is aiming at teaching students about LGBTQI topics. In 2020, she coordinated a collection of fairy tales, which is called A Fairy Tale for Everyone, and it includes adapted fairy tales. And they are adapted in a way that the characters are representatives of sexual, ethnic, or religious minorities. And the book was refused by the government in Hungary. Viktor Orbán said it is a homosexual propaganda, and the Labris Lesbian Association was forced to include a warning that its content is against the traditional gender roles. Dorottya, initially our session should have been titled Freedom for Everyone. So I would like to ask you, is this motto, Freedom for Everyone, utopia in Hungary, as it is also a member of the Visegrad Group?
Well, it depends how we define freedom, but if we define it in political terms, I think it is a utopia at the moment, because the current regime is more and more authoritarian and trying to reduce the freedom of especially women and sexual minorities, and also children. So we will talk at some point about the fairy tale book. It also affects children's sexuality and children's rights to access information.
Vy jste před rozhovorem říkala, že už se aktivismu věnujete 20 let.
You said that you are an activist for 20 years. So you have had an opportunity to see how the freedom develops within this period of time. And you told me that you think that Hungary is no longer a democratic country. So I would like to ask, what would you say to Czech citizens, to the Czech society, which is still kind of free, and we have freedom of speech, how to avoid encountering ourselves in the same situation as Hungary is right now?
Well, good question. Yeah, it's sometimes an issue, like, so how did we end up having this kind of regime, which started as a, conservative and progressive, or left, right, liberal, etc. Political forces exchange each other. So it was not really foreseeable in 2010 that this is going to happen, but there were signs already then, especially regarding LGBT rights. So right from the beginning of Orbán's ruling in 2010, they immediately started to change laws, like to redefine marriage in the constitution as the union of a woman and a man, changed the definition of family in family law to include the woman and the man and children, intentionally ignoring the diversity of families, not just LGBT families or rainbow families, but many other family forms and so on. And also they changed school curricula in 2012, 2013 to include a very conservative view of genders and making LGBT sexualities completely invisible, imposing rigid traditional gender norms. The children, so it's a kind of an indoctrination of children to these traditional gender roles, which in reality they don't really exist anymore, because the world is changing and it's 21st century, so they're really outdated. So this was a long process, and it was in 2019 when the anti-LGBT propaganda became like stronger, and this is happening in the region, so not only in Hungary. What's different is that in Hungary it's the government that pushes this anti-LGBT and anti-gender propaganda, and since the government has like overwhelming majority in the parliament, they can introduce and accept any laws. They completely damage their opposition. This is where you can see that the anti-democrat, or like the backsliding of democracy and anti-gender and anti-LGBT politics are happening together, and they support each other. So this is when politics, if it goes on this track, trying to reduce democratic rights, then one of the main pillars of this is anti-gender politics. So I mean, it's a warning sign when this starts to happen.
Vidíte tyhle varovné znaky?
Do you see any other warning signals in other countries of the Visegrad Group, for example in Slovakia? Also, has a representative of the Hungarian government expressed his or her opinion on what happened in Slovakia?
Yes, the anti-gender politics is quite strong in Slovakia as well, and also in Poland, not so much in the Czech Republic as far as I know. But even in Poland, where the situation is just as bad or even worse than in Hungary regarding LGBT rights, there is still like opposition to the government. So that's a big difference. And it's also a very telling thing that when the shootings in Bratislava happened, our government didn't say a word about it. And that was really shocking. I mean, shocking, but not surprising after all. Yeah.
Zaznamenala jsem v té veřejné debatě v Česku.
I noticed in the public debate in Czechoslovakia, let's say, that there are many people who are becoming more and more active, and they are trying to support non-binary people, trans people, rainbow families. But there are still questions about how to support these minorities, how to stop using just vague mottos, vague proclamations, and do something specific, because symbols are important. It is, of course, important that there are protests, and the Wenceslas Square in Prague is full of protesters. But how to activize the society to avoid the situation that is now in Hungary or in Poland, for example? So do you have a recommendation what we can do?
I think it is very difficult to activate citizens nowadays. So something much more like elementary or more crucial or affecting more people have to happen. And this is actually happening in Hungary now. So now we are having enormous demonstrations for teachers, because teacher situation is really bad in Hungary and the government is not doing anything. But it's very important that solidarity is practiced, and not just in speech, like not just like signing petitions or I don't know what, but like really supporting each other, expressing support for another minority group, let's say. So maybe it's not my issue, but one day they might support me as well. So this mutual solidarity, I think, is really, really important and more important, and active, like kind of radical solidarity. So like going there. What actually students are doing. So some of the all of the demonstrations for teachers now are actually organized by students, because the situation in public education is really so devastating. It affects everyone, not just teachers, but obviously students as well, and parents, and like the whole society. So and as an LGBT organization, we are also standing behind this. So we are going there like, yes, Labris is there, and Labris is supporting teachers, and obviously there are lesbians among teachers, there are teachers among lesbians, so it's not like there are groups and they are not everybody overlaps with with somebody else. So social groups. So in all these discriminated or minority social groups, there are intersections with other social groups. So that's why it's so important to always express support, even if you are not personally affected, because some in your group might be.
Takže nějaká intersekcionální podpora, řekněme, protože občas se objevují i hlasy, že ten, kdo není z té skupiny, tak by třeba neměl za tu skupinu mluvit.
If you're not from the group, you should not speak for the group. So you don't agree with this claim?
You don't have to speak for them. You have to support them so that they can speak for themselves, I think. And sometimes, there are situations when you can speak for them. But you have to be very careful, because, of course, it's always representatives of the group that know best, what their problems and their interests are. But you have to support them so that they can express themselves. I think that's the best.
Zmínila jste vzdělání.
You mentioned education and the situation of teachers. It's terrible, not only wage-wise, but also, and if I'm saying this wrong, please correct me, but from what I read, I think gender should not be said, and you should pretend that LGBTQ people don't exist. That's what Orbán wants. And you fight against that by the book A Fairy Tale for Everyone. We will have a Czech edition very soon, and it's 17 fairy tales. In 5 of them there are LGBTQ plus characters, and in other fairy tales are other disadvantaged or handicapped people. How did Hungary accept this book?
The story of this book is very interesting, because so our organization has an educational program. We've been working on educating young people about LGBT matters and discrimination and human rights for more than 20 years. And then we thought we should somehow reach out to younger children as well, because our school program is mostly for secondary school young people. And so we thought that the fairy tale book would be the best tool for talking to younger people. And so this was a pedagogical project. And when it got published 2 years ago, the political scene just exploded because one of the far-right politicians made a public performance of destroying the book. And this really triggered a lot of political and also education, professional, psychological responses from professionals. So a big debate came about children's sexuality and how do children acquire their sexual orientation, gender identity. So these were taboo topics before, and then suddenly everyone was talking about it, and then the book became a bestseller, and now it's published in 10 languages. The Czech is coming in a week or two. It's all the 4 Visegrad languages now will be out. So yeah, so funny, or like ironically, this is actually what made us so visible, in spite of the fact that the Orbán government tries to really suppress LGBT activism and tries to ignore us completely, but we cannot really be ignored anymore.
Ano, snahy o rozpoutání skandálu vyvolala Dora Duro, představitelka krajně
the scandal was by Dora Duro from our homeland. She publicly destroyed the book, as far as I know. And you said that the book was a bestseller. Congratulations. I think that's a great feedback. I would like to know, these activities from Orbán for suppressing education about LGBTQ and these other manifestos against them, do they originate in fear? I think these people are afraid.
I don't think it's fear. So I don't think that Orbán and his government is afraid of LGBT people. What LGBT people specifically, I think what they are trying to do, it's important to see this whole, so all the things that are happening in the framework of this transnational anti-gender politics, because it's a global phenomenon, and those politicians who are pushing their anti-gender agenda they have a worldview. So they want a traditionalist society where gender roles are very rigid and fixed, and women are subordinated, and the main meaning of their life is giving birth to children and so on. And they are trying to impose this ultra-conservative and outdated gender agenda on society. So they have a big political agenda. It's not really fear. So the fear is, yes, there is fear, more like general or ideological fear that the traditional nuclear family will be damaged by sexual minorities and other groups who are fighting for diversity and acceptance, because the nuclear family is very important. It's the core of this traditional regime. So, and also the other thing is, so it's not just about gender. It's also about nationalism, xenophobia. They are afraid that the nation state will be damaged, of which the core is the nuclear family. So I think it's very important to understand that this is not purely just about gender, but about the whole like what society is like, or what society they want to have.
Když jsme si povídali opět před diskuzí, tak jste říkala,
when we were talking before this discussion, you said that you feel like you are starting to be ignored, that this open hate and misunderstanding against you was replaced by ignorance. So what is harder for you, feeling the pressure from them or them pretending that you don't exist?
What I meant was that, because you were asking whether I'm getting any threats or something from the government. And so in that sense, I meant that they are trying to pretend that these LGBT groups don't exist on the one hand. Or like, for example, they when I got the Time 100 most influential people in the world last year. That's quite a big thing, and no governmental media was reporting anything about that, so as if I didn't exist.
Já se omlouvám, že jsem to neřekla na začátku. Ano, Dorottya.
Yeah, I'm sorry for not saying this. You were one of the Time's 100 most important people.
Yeah.
Pardon, pokračujte, jenom jsem to chtěla ještě vypíchnout.
I just wanted to reiterate that, so now you may continue.
I mean, it was obviously a political decision, because the other Hungarian who got this nomination was Katalin Karikó, who invented the mRNA vaccine against COVID, so I don't think we are on the same level, but anyway. So on the one hand, they do try to ignore us, but at the same time, well, they cannot really ignore us anymore, because the movement got very strong exactly because of all this oppression. But on the other hand, they are also trying to introduce, these false stories about us and demonize us, like we are part of the international gender lobby that comes from Brussels and is financed by George Soros, and we are trying to destroy the family, and we want everybody to have different gender every day, so it's kind of these are quite irrational things, but for those people who only follow governmental media, which is not so difficult because most media is owned by the government. So I think that's also an important difference when we look at the countries in the region, like how the media is standing. Like in Hungary, there are only a few independent media sources are still existing. And what was I saying?
Nevadí. Budeme o tom určitě mluvit, o médiích.
We will talk about media as well, media as a tool for propaganda. I would like to ask you, how is it possible that Orbán is so successful? Do Hungarians really support Orbán, or do they support LGBTQ community? How much do Hungarians support LGBTQ community?
For Orbán to be successful, they had to change the election law in their first term. So now it's almost impossible for any other party to win an election. And by now, it seems that he realized that like half of the country is enough for him. Because of the elections law, they can get 2/3 majority by about 40-something% of the votes. So, and people in the countryside are more supportive of him. So now he's very heavily focusing on propaganda in the countryside. He gave up on Budapest because Budapest is in the opposition's hands, so to say, and. So his success is a kind of relative success, but I mean in terms of numbers, but since So that's why I'm saying it's not a democracy anymore, because they are playing by their own rules in which they cannot be defeated. And what was the other? So why is he so successful? And what was the other?
Jestli máte pocit vlastně, že většina maďarské
If you think that Hungarian society is under Orbán's spell, or if these are, if this is manipulated, if Hungarian society is manipulated by Orbán, if the situation was different if Orbán was not there.
Obviously, we would probably still be living in a democracy. But what's interesting, and I think something hopefully subversive is going on, is that so half of the country votes for Orbán, the other half of the country hates Orbán. And those who hate Orbán hate everything he does. And now when he fights against LGBT people, those people who hate Orbán, even if they were homophobic before, now they cannot be, so they have to start supporting LGBT people. And this is very visible in the past years. We have never had so much support before. When the so-called child protection law was introduced last summer, in 3 days we could organize a demonstration where like 10,000 people were there and 100,000 signed the petition. You know, this was never the case before. And the biggest thing was the referendum, the homophobic referendum, which was held on the same day as the national elections this April. And we're asking homophobic questions like, do you want your children to receive propaganda education about gender transition in school without parental consent, stuff like that. And so LGBT organizations and human rights organizations, 16 organizations together, we were also involved. We ran an incredibly successful media campaign to convince people that they should vote invalidly, because the questions were phrased in a way that yes was not really an answer. So very manipulative questions. So to make the referendum non-binding, a significant number of people had to vote in an invalid way, like, you know, crossing both yes and no, and 1.7 million people did that, which was like unbelievable. So yeah, and actually I have to say that since this referendum we have been kind of left in peace. So I don't think this will last forever, but at least now we can like take a break from fighting every day. But I think this must have been a warning sign for Orbán that maybe this, you know, anti-LGBT politics is not so successful anymore. So he's probably working on figuring out who the next enemy could be. And if he chooses a next enemy, we LGBT people will have to support. So before LGBT people, it was migrants and refugees who were the main enemy. This can happen again, by the way. It might happen. But anyway, so whoever will be the next enemy, we will have to support their fight, and we will have to fight against that propaganda. So going back to, you know, solidarity and collaboration.
Děkuju. Já bych teď chtěla dát první ze 3 možností.
Thank you. Now I'd like to give the space to the audience to ask. If you want to ask, feel free to do so. We have 2 questions. Please wait for the microphone.
Dobrý den.
Good afternoon. I'll ask in Czech. Okay, no problem. Thank you for your participation. I remember many discussions here in Ji.hlava, but this is very emotional for me. I still remember the protest that happened on Wednesday at the Wenceslas Square in Prague. And I want to ask how easy or difficult it is in Hungary to come out publicly for people that are famous, sportsmen or publicly visible people. I don't think it would be easy, but I know that, for example, in Poland, the rights of the LGBTQI community are also limited, but they have a transgender politician, for example. So are there any sports people, artists, or publicly visible people who say they are queer publicly? Thank you very much for the question. Dorottya, we have had a similar case in Slovakia recently when a TV moderator came out publicly live on TV. So do you have similar personalities in Hungary as well?
Not a lot. Like there's one openly gay politician, not in Fidesz, of course. And very few public figures are out, but it's becoming a bit more frequent. So it was a complete taboo until a few years ago, and now some people are coming out and take on their orientation or identity openly. But yeah, I think that if somebody comes out now as a public figure, they will probably not get the same kind of like bad treatment as before, like, excluding them. They will probably get a lot of hate speech on their personal Facebook or Instagram, but there will also be a lot of support for them. So Orbán is polarizing society, and that means that there are people who really, really hate LGBT people, but there are people who very much support them, and this supporting side is getting stronger. So there are much more people supporting LGBT people now than before.
Přece jenom udělám takový malý follow-up.
I would like to ask a follow-up question. Do you think that if there were more public people that come out publicly from culture, pop culture or sport, do you think that this would change the situation in Hungary? Or do you think that this is not needed? What you need in Hungary is to have a new government, to change the government and the law?
Yes, that's what we need. No. I don't think that this, I mean, if I don't know, a lot of people, a lot of celebrities came out, this wouldn't change politics. We need a different regime. And since this is not a democratic regime anymore, it will not stop. Like so Fidesz members will not wake up one morning and say like, oh, actually, I've just realized that we are not doing well democratically, so let's stop and go back. It's not going back. So
there has to be. A teď jsme se probudili, to se asi nestane, že?
So that really wouldn't happen, that they just would wake up in a new reality, right?
No, I don't think so. So something radical will have to happen to overthrow this regime, I think, because it's too far gone in authoritarian ways. And also very, very corrupt, and that's another important thing, that they are positioned everywhere for like 5-10 more years, and they own the whole economy, and so money goes around from one pocket to the other, and so the whole regime has to be changed, and these people have to be eliminated from power and from positions where they can get even more money, because they stole the country practically.
Myslím na vaši otázku, ještě jednu doplním.
I have another follow-up question.
věc, která to všechno změní, měla vypadat?
How should the radical thing that would change everything look like? Do you think that a revolution is needed, or will you wait till Orbán dies?
He's not that old, you know. He's not even 60, I think. So, I mean, I wish him good health, of course, but...
Samozřejmě nepodporujeme žádné násilí.
Of course, we don't support violence.
Ani nikomu nepřejeme smrt.
And we don't wish death.
So if we wait until the end of his life, we will be suffering, I suppose, for another 20, 30 years. And he has his cronies, and he has the next generation of Fidesz politicians who are really like robots. It's incredible. They don't have their own thoughts about anything, and they are just part of a system that just reproduces their own rhetorics and political and economic activities. So the regime has to be somehow overthrown. I don't know whether the solution is a revolution or not. I hope not, or I hope it won't be something violent or bloody, but something radical will have to happen, I think.
Tak, vy jste se hlásil.
Thank you. There was another question over there. I would like to come back to a question that we have already heard and that wasn't answered, and that was the views of Hungarian society. The Czech society has been supporting more and more the rights of queer people, even though still the majority was against in the past. So I was wondering, in Hungary, the Orbán's policy reflects what the majority of the society thinks? Is it this case, or does it contradict what the majority of Hungarian society believes in? And has this been changing gradually? Could you perhaps have a look back into the history and to describe how this has been changing?
Oh, it's a good question, because, you know, it's always... like an interference between what the majority thinks and what politics says. But what we see is that social support for LGBT rights is growing. I'm not saying that the majority is now so supportive, but they're more supportive than before. So it seems like this LGBT hatred is counterproductive, because and also because of so today's younger generation, so teenagers and young people in their 20s, it's a different generation than ours and older, because it's for them it's so much more natural, you know, to have LGBT people around to talk about sexuality. They get a lot of information from all sorts of sources, internet and so on. So the teenagers I see, like, they just don't, you know, they don't even understand what this whole fuss is about. What's wrong with, you know, somebody not being heterosexual? So what? So I think there's the social change is coming mostly from young people. I think old people are more conservative or traditional, what they tend to be. But as I said, the preference or attitude towards politics, so whether you are on one side or the other, influences what you will think about LGBT people. So now they are connected. And I don't think that this trend that support is growing more will be reversed. I don't think that it doesn't look like that. I hope.
Ještě nějaký dotaz v tomto bloku?
Are there any more questions? There is one in the first row.
Dobré odpoledne.
Good afternoon.
Ona si pro tuhle otázku bude nutný trošku kontext.
I think we would need to give some context for my question. At the end of 2020 in Brussels, the Euro representative of Fidesz was withheld in a gay club. So I'm wondering, has this had an influence on the LGBTQI topic in Hungary? And how was the Hungarian public informed about this by the publicly owned media?
There is no publicly owned media, really. There is Fidesz-owned media and private independent media. So this was the case when one Fidesz politician, who is like one of the founders and the most loyal members of Fidesz he was a founding member. It was, I don't know, I already knew in the 90s that he was gay, so I think everybody else knew probably. And he was the one who wrote the homophobic part of the constitution. He's a legal expert. So we don't like him, obviously, because of that. And when this thing happened that he was caught in this sex party in Brussels, where he tried to escape through the water pipe. And they also found some ecstasy in his backpack.
Úplně vzorový konzervativní politik.
That is an amazing, ideal conservative politician, right?
That was so funny, really. I mean, he was really a subject of like an incredible amount of jokes and memes and stuff. But Fidesz, so they got rid of him like next day. So there is this enormous party loyalty, but if somebody does something like this, he was gone. Even though he was like founding member, most loyal, he was just gone. And in the governmental media, there was no news about this at all. So you could learn about this only in the independent media. They don't allow for such misbehavior. There's an enormous party discipline in Fidesz, and everybody has to say the same thing. And there are ongoing gossip about who is gay in the government. So like.
Chtěla jsem se na to právě zeptat.
But that's what I wanted to ask about.
Klidně to dokončete. Potom budu.
Feel free to continue. I'll continue later.
Unfortunately, managed to reveal anyone, but we have suspicions about who these people are.
Ano, budu navazovat tím, kolik z těch strážců morálního řádu, řekněme, a starého konzervativního řádu kteří vlastně utužují
order, the conservative order, who are the proponents of the anti-gender and anti-LGBTQ plus propaganda, are they actually members of the community who didn't go through a coming out? And is this maybe also their fear, their efforts to change themselves in some way, their inability to admit to themselves what their reality is?
Well, this is a psychological question. So, I mean, there's lots of psychological literature about it. So there's, I mean, those people who are the most homophobic and even aggressively homophobic, some of them are suppressing their own sexuality. I don't know what can be done about this. I mean, except going to a therapist. But violently homophobic people, you don't usually go to a therapist saying like, "Oh, I have this problem, and can you help me?"
Bohužel.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Předtím jsme mluvili o nějaké intersekcionální podpoře napříč komunitami.
We talked about intersectional support between different communities, different minorities. I wanted to also touch upon feminism. because you have a new president, a female president from Fidesz, Katalin Novák. She was elected by parliament where Orbán has a majority. What's feminism like in Hungary? Is Orbán trying to maybe show through her that he is dealing with this, that he is a feminist, but actually the situation of feminism is as bad as LGBTQ rights in Hungary?
Yeah, it's as bad or even worse. So, as I said earlier, the core of anti-gender propaganda. One of them is LGBT rights, and the other is women's rights, and the whole Orbán government's agenda is, to reintroduce traditional gender roles. So they are doing a lot to kind of take the. So they are not feminists, of course. They are not supporting feminism. They are supporting, but feminism was never really supported in Hungary, I have to say. So if there was a very strong feminist movement before Orbán, maybe it would be different now. Maybe he wouldn't be able to be so anti-feminist. The fact that there's a woman as a president, so she's not like the Slovak president, of course. She's just, a puppet, like the previous president was. She's a Fidesz member. That's how democratic we are. That the president is a member of the leading party. The previous one was also a member. It doesn't mean anything. Actually, this president is well. She's really homophobic. She was the one who initiated the law that after the fairy tale book was published, a few months later, the right for child adoption for LGBT people was taken away, and she signed this law. And the law said that from now on, single people cannot adopt children, only married couples. And this affected LGBT people because as an LGBT person, you could adopt children as a single person before. And now you cannot. If you are a single person, you have to ask permission from the Ministry of Family Affairs, which was her before she became a president. So her personal approval was needed if you were a single person and wanted to adopt a child. So that was, I think, really one of the ugliest things she could do.
Takže to není zrovna
her feminism.
tolerantní a feministická figura.
So she's not a tolerant feminist figure. Another thing I wanted to ask, we already touched upon this, the media. Are there any platforms in Hungary right now for feminist thinking, queer thinking, platforms that are not marginalized and that are easily accessible? You don't have to look for them very hard.
I think you have to. But on the other hand, in the mainstream independent media, these topics are also finding their way more often. I noticed that in the leading independent papers in the past few years, a lot of young female journalists joined these papers. I mean, before that it was almost completely male-dominated, but now there are much more and young journalists, female journalists there. So I think that's a good sign, and they very often pick up feminist topics. So these issues and these topics become mainstreamed in the media, and I think that's a good thing.
Tak zeptám se na další vaše dotazy.
Are there any questions from the audience?
Tak tamhle vidím
there,
kamery.
I see one by the camera.
Jo, tak já mám otázku ještě zpátky k Fidesu a chtěla jsem se zeptat, jak si Fides udržuje legitimitu v očích voličů, když konstantně mění svoji agendu
in the eyes of their voters when they change their agenda all the time and they have so many scandals. So how they legitimize themselves in the eyes of the voters?
Very good question. It seems like it doesn't really matter that they are changing their politics all the time. It's an interesting phenomenon. I mean, some of Fidesz voters are. It's almost like a religion. So whatever the Orbán government does is right. People follow them blindly. I don't know how they built this up, but it's a bit like a sect. And I have to. I mean, unfortunately, my own mother is one of these followers, and I'm just trying to understand how this can happen. That she's so brainwashed, and what she recently said that she also reads independent media, so she is informed from both sides, and she still believes what Fidesz says. So they are very good at saying what they want to say in a way that people believe it, and they can always find an explanation for whatever they do. Now we have this enormous economic crisis. For 12 years, we had this campaign that they are keeping heating costs very low, and now they jumped up like 7 times higher, so people are frustrated, but they are still explaining that they are still keeping it lower than it would be if it was market price, so people are still believing that the government is still supporting their heating bills. And some people will not be able to pay those bills. But there still will be an explanation that first of all, the enemy is always outside, and they are trying to protect people as much as they can. So it's the war, it's the Ukrainians, it's the EU, it's never Russia, by the way. So there is always somebody else to blame, and they say that they are doing their best to fight these enemies who are trying to take away our rights and livelihoods, and maybe they cannot do more, but they are really trying hard and doing their best, and people believe this.
Jaké argumenty zapojovat, protože možná
What are the arguments that we can use? Because everybody has somebody in their family who needs to be explained. You need to explain to them the human rights issues, and you really want to explain it to them, but it's like going against the wall. So what arguments do you use with your mom if she supports Fidesz and you're an activist which is probably against Fidesz and Orbán?
Well, to be honest, I don't go against the wall anymore, not with her, so I can't. I mean, I hit my head so many times that it's not worth. I think it's more important. As an activist, I can talk to more people than my mother, so just let her leave her like that, but I try to do, more things that impact more people. I can't help this situation. I can't help her thinking. She hasn't even read the fairy tale book, because it's like, no, I'm not gonna read such a book, so what can you do? So sometimes when you have like personal relations like this, you cannot really help, but you have to try elsewhere. It's easier to talk to people, I think, who are not so close to you, because whenever you start arguing with someone who is like your family member or friend or something, you can always, get into a very like triggering emotional issues. So maybe you don't have to start this within your family. You have to start elsewhere. You can start on Facebook. You can form your own community. You can be part of some organization, and then you talk to more people, not just one people who happens to be your mother.
Moc mě mrzí, že to zažíváte teda.
I'm very sorry you're going through this.
Znamená to teda, že byste
Does it
se
mean
nesnažila za každou cenu
that you're not trying to build bridges at any cost? You're not trying to find common ground with people who don't want to listen. Because sometimes if we don't try to talk to other people, maybe we're losing something. I know that it is very hard myself, but do you think we should try more to speak to such people? Or do you think we need to support our own bubble?
No, I think we have to get outside our own bubble, but you cannot convince everybody. There are people who you cannot convince. Like you don't start conversation with the Nazi, so it's pointless. You won't convince them. I think it's important to talk to people who are like not sure or don't really have an opinion or kind of, as we say in Hungarian, salon homophobe, like, they pretend they are not, but they have these ideas really. So those people can be moved and they are the majority. With extreme people, I don't think it's personally worth talking to because it can be emotionally very hard, and pointless because they won't be convinced. And they are a minority. They are a small minority. So really, I think what's important is to talk to the majority, who is like, maybe. Actually, I don't have anything personally against gay people, but I don't support Pride because it's this kind of you can argue against these, and very often successfully. You can't argue against gay people should be exterminated. What can you say about that?
Z čeho vlastně vychází ty extrémně silné heteronormativní standardy?
What are the strongest heteronormative standards in Hungary coming from, and why are people still clinging to them so hard? Especially this small group of people, you say that whatever Fidesz does, even though it is not beneficial for them, they still believe Fidesz.
It's very hard, and I'm not sure it's specific to Hungary, because these kind of thoughts are the same everywhere. But there is something about being a post-socialist country, and very often these people belong to older generations who had this regime, which they may have criticized, but they still somehow maybe feel at home in it, or they don't find it strange that they are not living in a democratic system because they are kind of used to other oppressive system. I don't know. I don't think it's something specifically Hungary or Fidesz. Fidesz does something very well to keep these people following them, but I think that's just populist methodology of getting a lot of people follow them, but I don't think it's really specific. But I mean there has to be a reason why within the region Hungary ended up like this. But I think a bit more time needs to pass before we can clearly figure out, what is it specifically that happened, that drove. I mean, there's a lot of theorizing about this already, but I don't think we are there yet to see this clearly.
Myslím, že ty tendence jsou u nás taky, byť je ta situace.
I think same tendencies are here, even though we are still more open than Hungary.
Vidíte něco, co bychom třeba...
Do you see anything that we as Czechs, or maybe even Slovaks after the terrible events in Bratislava, Do you see anything we can do? And I'm circling back to the beginning. Are there any concrete steps, preventative steps that we can do as a society to prevent this act for the protection of children that you have, and this law that starts very inconspicuously but then suddenly touches so many people?
Well, the difficulty is that very often these decisions are made in the upper level of politics, so you don't necessarily have too much space to interfere with these laws. I think that today's politicians are very heavily polling, what society thinks about what. So especially populist governments, they are running surveys every week about every question to figure out where their politics should go, because this is the thing with populism, that they don't really have any principles, just to get popular, and so they are following popular opinion, and that's where they are going. So I think, and this is how, this is why public opinion is so important. So Hungary is specific because it's civil society. So like critical NGOs are the kind of the real opposition to the government, because the political opposition is not really functional anymore, and that gives us a very big responsibility to do things and to try to make as many people as possible understand what's really going on and why it's a problem to introduce such laws and how it affects minorities and so on. So I think that's something that can be done, to talk about things really with people, not necessarily your mother, but so talking with people about so that it's in people's mind that this is problematic, this is wrong. I think that that people have to be more active in having conversations practically.
Coming back to the opposition, are there any alternatives in Hungary that would be here for a better future, not only for queer people but for everyone?
I don't think this can come from the opposition parties, because of their political situation. They are so unimportant, and in this kind of regime where only Fidesz can win, it doesn't make much sense to have an opposition. So they are humiliated on a daily basis. Whatever they introduce, it's never accepted. They never support anything that the Orbán government does. They oppose everything. So there's no constructive politics is done in the parliament at all. So I don't think that the solution will come from there.
And where do you think this solution will come from? Because you said that something radical must happen, something non-violent or something similar. But if the change is not coming from the opposition, if it's not coming from the people, where is it coming from and when? I know it is a tricky question.
It has to come from the people. It can only come from the people, I think. When and where and how, I don't know, but it will have to come from the people, definitely. Young people. I have a lot of trust in young people, because there is really, as far as I see, there is a big generational change in thinking at this moment.
Rozumím naprosto.
I understand. I definitely understand. I also hope they will change things. I saw a question back in the hall.
Dobrý den.
Hello.
Zajímalo stav, kdyby
I am interested
Evropská unie
in a hypothetical situation. If the European Union is to expulse Hungary from the Union, will this change something? Will this make this radical change that is needed? Or do you think that it would be destructive and would not bring any positive sides?
I hope this will never happen. But I don't think it will be positive. I think if the EU expulses Hungary, we will just Hungary will just tie its bonds even stronger with other authoritarian regimes like Russia and China and Turkey and so on. They are already very good friends. So to say. So I don't think that would help people. It's interesting that the government has a very strong anti-EU rhetoric, but the Hungarian population is one. So the preference to be an EU member is one of the highest in Europe among the Hungarian population. So I don't think that So I don't think this is more than rhetoric from Orbán, because, as I said, he always needs some sort of external enemy, but I don't think that he would really want to leave the EU. And I really hope that the EU will not want to kick out Hungary, because that would be really bad for the people. Of course, it would be bad for economically as well, but socially even more importantly. So.
Ještě chcete dodat něco?
Do you want to add something? Okay, so please wait for the microphone.
To jsem si právě taky myslel.
This is what I was thinking. But I am wondering if this would happen if the Union is to expulse Hungary because they don't stick to the principles of the European Union. And if they adopted a really harsh attitude towards Hungary, wouldn't this mean that the people in Hungary would protest? Wouldn't this be like the decisive factor making them to fight against Orbán? So wouldn't this be the radical moment that is needed?
Maybe yes, but the problem is that Orbán's followers would be presented with a very different story about this. So there wouldn't be enough people to protest, I think, because today's protests, like last Sunday, there was a protest in support of teachers where there were like about 100,000 people. It was really unprecedented almost during the Orbán regime, but they are still not. They are ignoring these. So in the government media, the report was that a couple of thousands of people were demonstrating, and so this is how it happens. It's just an example, but to show that this is how it happens. So that part of the country doesn't get the kind of information. If they would probably be told, like, because we wanted to leave the EU to defend our national boundaries. It will be better for us like this, and so on. So there wouldn't be enough people who would know the real know the kind of reality that would be good to know in order to act against this. There would be like enormous protests and everything, but I'm not sure that in this regime such protests can do much. I have to say, a lot of people are leaving the country already to move to EU countries. Like almost like 10% of the country has left since Orbán came into power.
Už žádný dodatek? Pokud ne, tak tady máme dotaz první.
There is another question here.
Je mikrofon na cestě?
Please wait for the microphone.
Už.
Okay, it is coming.
Já teda nechci úplně přežívat tu úplně pozitivní
I don't want to add to this negative way we are talking here about, but I'm so sorry for the negativity. I am still kind of surprised by the fact that you draw hope from the young generation, because in the Czech Republic after 1989 we have been saying that we need to wait for the new generation that will change the course of things. But later on, from the sociological research, we've seen that children only repeat what their parents do, and so on. So is this different in Hungary? I am really surprised by the fact that you believe that the young generation of upcoming voters of Fidesz can be different than the older voters of Fidesz or supporters of the regime, and that the change is coming from them.
I think that this is changing. This is different. That's another generation, not the one that we lost hope in after the regime change in 1989. I think this is again a new generation. So I really see that I see and I hope that they have a different attitude to things. I might be wrong though, but I'm more positive now than I saw that the previous generation, who are like now in their 30s, they are much more passive. They just want to fit in the system and just accommodate to all the capitalist demands of, because their parents grew up in socialism and they want to somehow adapt to the regime and this generation, I mean, they are also very much adapted to the capitalist regime, and not so many of them are criticizing this, but they are criticizing other things. So if you look at like public or like both social media and also like mainstream media, there's going back to LGBT people, LGBT people are getting mainstreamed. There was Me Too, and people started to talk about sexual violence. So these things are happening, and this is what's affecting this generation more than the previous ones, I think.
Neber nám jedinou naději, kterou jsou mladí lidi, prosím.
We
ještě nějaký
need to
dotaz?
have hope in the young people.
Tamhle.
We have another question in the third row.
I just want to say something though. I mean, you are right that so we mustn't be naively optimistic, obviously, because the Bratislava shooting was a point when we had to think about this. Like that person was also 19-year-old. And there is a certain part of society where these views are, accepted. But I think that the parent of this person the father should take all the responsibility for this. So the most shocking part for me in the story was that the murderer was the son of a far-right politician. So this is where hate leads. And not only we lost two young LGBT person, but then the father also lost his son. And so we have to be aware even when we are doing activism and trusting in young people, that this is also present. So this is also, young people can also do this. So there are extreme views which they can succumb to. So you have to have to be alert to this as well, of course.
Já bych se ještě chtěla vrátit vlastně
I would like to go back to Fidesz, the structure of Fidesz, because you said it's almost a sect. Sects are usually a cult of one person. Does Viktor Orbán have any kind of person who will replace him? Because in China we saw that the president is taking power for himself. He doesn't have competition, but he doesn't even have somebody who can come after him. Is this similar in Hungary?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah, Orbán certainly has a personal cult. And I don't see a person in the party who would be prepared for taking over his position. I mean, he should retire in I don't know,
soon,
5-8 years, although he might want to remain a politician till then, because he the previous elections he said that they want to be in power until 2030. But now his vision is that Fidesz will be in power till 2060 or so. I think that's what he said. But I don't see a figure who could follow. But I think when that becomes the issue, somebody will just emerge. I mean, these systems go, and we know how this system works, and they also know it very well. I'm sure they are studying, you know, the Chinese regime and Russia and so on. They borrow ideas from each other all the time.
Vy jste, na to navážu, vy jste říkala předtím, že strana Fidesz...
You also said that Fidesz has all these little robots, let's say, people who are always believing them, always fighting for them. But so you're saying there is not one figure, one visible figure who would be charismatic enough, because Orbán is charismatic. Usually authoritarian leaders are charismatic. So there's nobody like that.
Yeah, because robots are not charismatic, you know. So true. Maybe he's making a mistake, or maybe he just hasn't found a charismatic enough person to follow him. Don't know.
To se ale může stát.
But it can happen.
I guess so. Yeah.
Máme nějaký další dotaz ještě?
Are there any more questions?
Nevidím úplně všude.
I cannot really see because I'm blinded by the light, but it doesn't look like any questions at this moment. Don't be shy. If you have a question, you can ask. If not, I will continue with questions. I wanted to come back to the EU, one we've already heard today. Because European Parliament said recently, just as you said, that Hungary is not a democracy anymore. So if the EU started to support the LGBTQI+ community in Hungary even more, if they had concrete mechanisms, not expelling Hungary from the EU, because that would really affect people very hard, even people who are innocent, but should EU come up with more and stronger mechanisms against countries who are losing democracy, more mechanisms to support LGBTQ people in Hungary?
I think that the EU only has one tool, which is money. And what's happening now in Hungary is that the EU is withdrawing a significant amount of money and forcing the Orbán government to change laws. And these laws are mostly related to corruption at the moment, but they may later come up with forcing the Orbán government to change laws that are related to human rights. And the Orbán government is now sheepishly trying to change these laws about corruption because they need the EU money, because Hungary is totally dependent on EU money for its economy. So I don't think the EU has another tool, at least rhetoric tools are not really helpful or even counterproductive. So when the so-called child protection law was introduced last year, and there was very heavy EU criticism, Orbán can always turn the EU rhetoric. He can weave the EU criticism into his own rhetoric about how the EU is trying to oppress us and colonize us, and that it's the Orbán government who can protect the nation, and they are doing their best to do so, and so on. So this kind of this kind of support is not really helping us at all. It's important for the activist community to feel that we are not alone, or we are supported. In other countries, people see what's going on here, so we don't feel isolated. So it's important for the community, but in general, it's not really helpful. Only the money works.
Je pro Maďary a Maďarky a všechny lidi v Maďarsku.
So for Hungarian people, is it important for them to feel the support from the V4 countries, from Czech people, for example?
It's interesting because the V4 country, the V4 union has kind of fallen apart now. So they practically kicked out Orbán. Because of the war, because Orbán's pro-Russia attitude. So it's not really working now. So even the other V4 leaders are criticizing Orbán, which must have been a shock for him, but he has other friends. So for us, yeah, I mean, it's kind of. So it's like this Central European, community that the V4 represents. I don't know. I mean, for me personally, it's a kind of homely feeling, or like comfortable that we have like similar cultures, or we kind of understand each other because of culture and history. And I'm sure that a lot of people feel like this, but. Politically, I don't. It was important in the EU to have the V4, because before Orbán was kicked out recently, he was always saying like it's the EU, the V4 countries that will bring real change in the EU, and we will tell how things should be because we know better. But it's not functioning now from Orbán's perspective.
Jak moc se vlastně bojíte toho utužování?
Are you afraid that Orbán will become friends with China and Serbia and other authoritarian regimes, and this friendship will become stronger?
They are already quite strong friendships. Orbán is very much supporting the Serbian political regimes. He's very good friends with Orbán, although now he's denying it, but it's obvious. That there is something with Putin that I don't know. I don't know what Putin blackmails Orbán with. I don't know, really.
Mimochodem ani tohle nevzalo.
Not even this took away Orbán's popularity among Fidesz voters. Not even his friendship with Russia in today's times, when Putin is caused the war in Ukraine.
No, Orbán believers. So the Hungarian national radio and television and media are promoting the Russian propaganda better than Russia. Sometimes you can see, reports about the war and why there is the war and who's responsible. It's really shocking how they are blaming Ukraine, and there is this theory that this is actually the war between Russia and America, and Ukraine is only a proxy, and I mean, Orbán believers listen to this all the time, and they believe it, including my mother. So recently we had a conversation about this, and that's where I was exposed with like, you know, what these people really think about the war. It's quite shocking. So he has stronger friends. And that this is why it would be such a big problem if Hungary was kicked out of the EU, because then we would join these countries, and it would be like I think it would become a full dictatorship then, if there was no control from the democratic countries within the EU.
Máme nějaký dotaz? Formoval se?
Are there any questions? Did anybody come up with a question? There is one.
Ano. Viděla jsem vás na poslední chvíli.
Ano, děkuji. Já jenom
I
otázku trošku širší.
have a broader question, I guess.
Do jisté míry správně na Orbána.
We're saying it's Orbán's fault, Putin's fault, and to a great degree that's true, but I think the problem is also the personification. The fact that we are probably looking for a new philosophy and turning against the enemy personified by Orbán or Putin is not really useful. So in Hungary or anywhere else, do you think there is a new, more democratic, sensible vision that is based in some philosophy that is not fighting against individuals? We need to fight against those individuals, but we also need to talk to people in Hungary, but also Africa, Brazil. We need to communicate with them. I think this is what we lack in the world, and that's the problem.
Yeah, I agree. I think saying Orbán all the time is kind of shortcut. So it's a regime. It's not one individual. One individual couldn't build up such a regime. Neither Orbán nor Putin. It's a whole bunch of you know, political you know, construction workers, so to say, who are responsible for developing this regime. But I agree that in our vision we shouldn't focus on individuals, but on the regimes that are, I mean, they are the leaders of these regimes. But as you were asking, so what happens if Orbán retires? The same regime may remain. So we have to deal with the regime, obviously, and also because these regimes are similar. So these authoritarian oppressive structures are very similar. They are using the same tools, even the same ideologies, and I think that's very useful and very helpful to think together with people who live in similar regimes and learn from each other, like, you know, what you are doing, you know, in order to challenge the regime, because probably the solution has to come from a very broad base, and not necessarily a nation-state base, but like a more international or global base, I think.
Ta situace není dobrá, myslím, že jsme popsali.
The situation is not good. I think we described many reasons why it is not good, many reasons why many people are oppressed in Hungary. But I don't want to end on a dark note. So do you have any positive message, an appeal to young people, because we have so many young people in the audience, what they can do that helps? Of course, it is limited, and we touched upon this. But do you have a message, a positive message, inspirational message that you would like to tell us?
Well, I don't know, fairyland belongs to everyone. That's at the moment in Labris, because Labris is kind of So it was established more than 20 years ago. The founders, I wasn't one of the founders, I joined a few years later, but I mean, we are all aging. So like we are 20 years older now than when we established Labris. Most of us are middle-aged or even older. And now we have 2 young people who joined. And it's really incredible because they are full of energy. We are all burnt out, of course, but they are full of energy and they have totally different viewpoints about things and different knowledges, different professional knowledges that they can bring in. So it's very, very useful for the organization to have their knowledge and enthusiasm. And it's, of course, very difficult to work across generations. We have issues with that sometimes, but I would encourage, of course, young people to either to form your own groups and organizations or try to find the ones that already exist so that you don't have to invent the wheel all the time, because some organizations have the knowledge already, like how to function and how to do things, but maybe the things can be done in new ways or different ways as well. So I encourage everyone to form groups, any sort of groups, or join groups. Don't fight individually. I mean, you can be a Facebook fighter on your own, but and that's also important because half of our life is spent on Facebook and so on. But I think exactly because of so much, such a big part of our life is taken by virtual reality, we have to really cling to the non-virtual reality and stay there and find connections again and talk to real people and do things together. I think this is really important now because things have kind of shifted in a bit too much into this virtual direction. So I don't know. I can feel the strength of when we sit down like real people, real time talk. Even when we have like our monthly meeting in Labris, when we meet online, like during COVID, nothing really happened. But if we sit together, like real time, real people, we are so much more creative and we have incredible like brainstorming and it's so funny and so there's such a big difference between like joining people really. So I'm all for that.
Thank you very much. I will also try to summarize a little bit. I think this final thought was amazing. Connect, activize, meet real people in real time. And what I also noted, intersectional support across communities and minorities. You don't really have to talk for them. Sometimes it is not right, but you need to speak with them and let them speak. Also, change is necessarily coming from people. Thank you so much for coming, Dorottya. Thank you for your courage and work, and thank you for this discussion.